Okay, Assalamualaikum and a very good evening to all of you. Today, I welcome to all of you to this talk. Okay, this is ini adalah program bahagian sejarah USM, merupakan ucapan siri bicara ilmuwan yang akan diadakan sepanjang tahun. Jadi bahagian sejarah mengalu-alukan sebarang kerjasama dan juga kesediaan mana-mana pihak untuk memberikan wacana melalui wacana yang disediakan inilah. Okay, this is mean our section, history section in USM are welcoming any parties who want to collaborate in giving their talk through this platform. Okay, for today talk is we have Dr. Elsa Clave here. Okay, now I will read her biodata. Okay, as Dr. Elsa Clave is an assistant professor of Southeast Asian Studies at the University of Hamburg and associate researcher at the French Center for Southeast Asian Studies, CAS. A historian by training, her research deals with cultures and mentalities with a regional specialization in the Philippines, Indonesia, and more recently, Malaysia. And her most recent publications are The Sultanates of the Southern Philippines, A Social and Cultural History of Islamization, which is her first monograph published in French in 2022 at the IFIO, and the Laguna copper plate inscription, 10th century Luzon, Java, and the Malay World, published in the journal Philippine Studies the same year. She is presently working on a book project tentatively entitled Space and Territory in Malaysian History, to which the talk of today is related. Okay, now I'm welcoming Dr. Elsa to give her talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Noras Mahani, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Dr. Hasmi, for the invitation today to present my research. I would like to take this opportunity also to thank Professor Mahani Musa for extreme support and help for doing this research over the last summer when I was in Malaysia. So today I will present the first result of this ongoing project. I will talk about Malay legal culture in the 19th and the 20th century, and especially Malay manuscript culture. But before starting, I would like to give a few elements of background to explain how I came to this topic. So years ago, I attended a talk on paper plantation in Singapore, and that was when I heard for the first time about those fascinating documents named the Surat Sungai, given to the head of a group of agriculturalists and as a kind of land deeds. So those documents are known. Karl Trocky, among others, have worked on them and make them quite famous for historians of Southeast Asia. And although there was a great deal of information in his work, mostly on the economic history of the region, I still had questions which remain in my mind. I wanted to see those documents. I wanted to know what they looked like, if they had map drawn on it or attached to it, and what was their material aspect. So that was guided my research. And in fact, this interest in the Surat Sungai got revived 4 years ago when I started another project about Euro-Asian encounters and treaty making in the Thai Malay Peninsula. For that project, I started to research the establishment of land boundaries, the manifestation of sovereignty, and also the establishment of the plantation economy in Malay territories. And those three elements, boundaries, sovereignty, and economy, are themes that are very much related to the Surat Sungai. Those surat, in fact, belong to a system that is neither the Malay customary land tenure nor the colonial land system. They form a third case, a system where land rights and ownership are influenced both by the pre-existing order and by interaction with the British and their administrative model. In today's talk, I propose to look at the different transactions recorded in the surat at three levels. First, for what they reveal of the conception of space, territory, and sovereignty at the time and in the context of their redaction. Second, for the legal and the administrative aspect underlying their use. and third, for the aspect of Malay manuscript culture that they reveal. So let me first give you a short introduction to the background. So the progressive establishment of the Strait Settlement, the federated and the unfederated Malay states in the Malay Peninsula led to a multitude of diplomatic relationships, as it's well known, and treaties. But what is less known is various other transactions related to land use and ownership were also made during that period. These transactions were recorded in the form of contracts between two or more parties and dealt with different aspects of this developing plantation agriculture economy. So among the possible contracts were the pawning of land, the buying, the selling, and the granting of rights, and also the authorization to cut trees and start a plantation. I will explain later the detail of the documents and the different transactions. So these surats are collectively referred as Surat Sungai, although nothing is named on the document as being a Surat Sungai. So they form a set of sources, and those sources are interesting because they are quite different compared to the ones that are traditionally used when one looks at land tenure. So usually we look at the acts and ordinance of the Legislative Council of the Strait Settlements, which tell a one-sided and rather straightforward history because it's the ordinance or the act from the British perspective. One can also look at the law cases, which is a different perspective. They show the practical aspect of the system when the system does not work or how it works, and how conflictual cases were resolved in court. What we have with the Surat Sungai is a third perspective, which supports this thesis of complex relationship between customary law, statutory law, and everyday practice related to land rights. The fact that this complexity is reflected both in the content and in the form of the surat make them very interesting sources, both for the historian and for the scholars of Malay studies. And that's exactly where I'm situating myself. So one of the intent of this talk is also to show how both fields of classical, so-called classical Malay studies and Southeast Asian history can meet. So let's start with the first aspect. So we know that the Surat Sungai are attested in Singapore and Johor in the 19th century. We do not know if such documents existed before, but we know that the system they support, the establishment and the regulation of a group of Chinese planters under the leadership of a Chinese man, existed in Riau much before the 19th century, in fact, in the first half of the 18th century. So that's when the second Bugis ruler of Riau established the first plantation. So these were not established by European, as you can hear. So exactly in 1734 and 1740. So gambir was cultivated, and you see the plant of the gambir on the left. Gambir was cultivated before in Sumatra and Java, but not in a large scale, mostly as medicine or also as an additive in the betel quid. But in the 19th century, in fact, other property are discovered to this plant. For his leather, it's used to tan leather. And this property, of course, make it more demanded. And the Chinese could get involved in greater number, which transformed significantly the type of agriculture that was made for 1 or 2 centuries before. So it was first brought in Riau in that scale. But as you know, maybe the Dutch attacked Riau in 1784, destroyed the entrepot. The Malay left the region. The Chinese planters seem to have stayed in the first place, but because the destruction of the entrepot disturbed the network and the importation of rice, it became very difficult for people to stay because there was no rice culture on the island. So little by little, they started to move to Singapore and to bring there the same plantation, same culture of gambir and paper. So you have the paper on the right side. So paper was used for his cultivated, for the fruits, and gambir for the leaves and the twigs. So different use. So what is interesting with the Quanchu system is that it revealed a different organization of space. So when the planters arrived in Singapore, they started those plantations. They were organized in a kankar, so it was the name of the settlement, near a river for irrigation. And they were under the leadership of a man, a Chinese headman, named the head or the master of the river, the Kangchu. But very quickly, there were no more land available because this system, in fact, at least the Suratula that we have and other Surat Kangchu that we have, do not show any borders. So there was a kankar, a place name, and the content of the Surat Sungai were mostly about the rights and the thing that have to be done, but not so much about the space and the limits of that space. In fact, there was no strict border. The Surat set the rights and the responsibility of the Kangchu, the head of the settlement, toward the land, but also toward the people, the community under its responsibility, and the product that circulated within that space. So the kankar designated both a village, the core of the settlement, and also the area around, the surroundings, without clear delimitation. So that quickly created some trouble in Singapore because there was no more land available. And the British in around 1840 decided that they should measure the land, they should survey the plantation and start to lay down borders. Laying down borders and surveying the plantation meant a stricter control, which was not so much in the interest of the planters, because stricter control meant also probably bigger taxes. And some of them, and after a lot of them, moved to Johor. So that's how we have this type of migration from Riau to Singapore, then ultimately to Johor. So the documents that are studied here come from Johor. And from those documents, we know that the Kangchu, in fact, was made upon the Besar Negeri. So he was made responsible for the settlement he was heading, and this was made through a ceremony, a very interesting ceremony, which is explained in Malay term. You know, he was dikurniakan, and he had the mission to guard the river, so the place, and also to take care of the people. And in that ceremony, he was given 2 pieces of rotan and a spear. So these are very similar to regalia and probably were symbols of authority. Because this Kangchu had to make sure that the law of the country, undang-undang dan peraturan yang ditetapkan oleh kerajaan, were continued to be followed. In 1873, there's a text that is edited, the Kangchu, and it explains in detail, how to administrate people and the agricultural lands. So that's where everything is described in much detail. And probably, so after 1873, we have really an institutionalization of this position. Before that, in fact, we do not have that many also Surat Taulia, so it's a little difficult to say with certitude how it was made. What is interesting with those, Surat Sungai, is that there is no map which is drawn. There is no representation of space. However, we know that at the same period, the same person was doing other contracts. So the Tumenggung was also issuing contracts on land, but he was doing that with Europeans and Arab traders. And with them, the type of contract was very different, and there was very often a map, or at least clear border with measurement that were drawn. So it's a kind of a question mark why the Surat Sungai and why the control system did not have those maps. So I see two possibilities explaining that. First, because the Surat Sungai, as the Canon Control explained, did not need it, in fact, to have a representation of space, because everything was centered around the river, and the territory was conceptualized as starting from a center. So it was less about the land, but more about the socio-political space that was organized by the plantation system. So it may have been irrelevant in that case to have a perception of space with strict borders. Another possible answer is that the Tumenggung may not have wanted to recreate the unrest provoked by the British law in Singapore, and he didn't want the Chinese planters to leave. So that's why there was no strict border that have been decided at that moment. What is clear is that we have in this system, and it's appeared very clearly in the Canon Control, the recreation of at a smaller scale of what is a Malay Negri. When Karl Trocchi explained that the agricultural system provided the vehicle by which a small group of Malay founded a new model of state on the mainland of the Malay Peninsula, he underlined that system, which does not have a Malay ruler at its head in this case, but a Kwangchu. So I will explain more about the Kwangchu system by looking at the different natures of the surat. So here we have one type of surat, the Taulia, but there are eight different other types. So this is a generic name, again, Surat Sungai, and it records various transactions. Again, to cite Karl Trocchi, there have been a typology that has been made about the surat with three stages explaining the evolution of the contracts. So the earliest example known are from 1844 to 1860. So during those first 15 years, the surat were very short and gave only basic information such as the date, the name of the river, and the name of the grantees. The second period started when the Tumenggung Dain Ibrahim died in 1862, and his son, Abu Bakr, introduced a system of administration which was inspired by the European one. So it was clearly and openly inspired by the European. And at that time, there was a production of legal written documents and the establishment also of an archival system, which was new in the Malay territory at that period. That became an important component of the administration, and that explained that the surat produced at that period were also longer, more elaborated, with more information about the different share of the lands, and we also included the signature of the parties. And then finally, the third stage is the standardization of those surat with the printing replacing the handwriting around 1880, and with the addition of the Johor land laws, which contain model of drafts for those land deeds. So it became quite different from what existed before. So what I did is I used Trocchi's typology, but I tried to go more on the Jawi manuscript to see their specific topic, form, composition, and I do that, try to understand through this scriptural practice in which way, in fact, local agents were addressing the administration of land. So my hypothesis was that we could see more looking at the original document in Jawi and by comparing a larger corpus. So we have, in fact, 9 different types of surat, which cover 5 domains, as you can see. So the first one, I already mentioned it, the Surat Taulia for the appointment of the head of the Kangkar, the Kangchu. But there are also other type of surat when basically someone is given the authorization to start a plantation. So we have different names: Surat Kongsi, Surat Izin Menebang Hutan karena membuka kebun, or Surat Keterangan. The third type is the one when this first land has been made, the plantation has been started, and then it's sold to another part. So they are called Surat Keterangan, Surat Jual Beli, Surat Serahan, also Surat Wakil. So Surat Wakil, they are just handed over for a certain period of time. And then two other types, the one recording the pounding of land, and the second was basically explaining the monopoly of the Guangzhou, which was given with the charge, with the status of being Guangzhou. And these are the Surat Pajak, because the Guangzhou could take pajak on several products, as I will explain. So the earliest example that is kept in the archive, which is not the earliest example existing, but the one that we can still access, is a Surat Keterangan, dated from 1843. It was issued by the Tumengong of Johor for a Chinese man named Lau Lib Keng, and it says that he wants to establish a plantation with 25 men on a river named Sokutai. So the agreement also provides the tax exemption for a period of 3 years. And we learn in this surat that, in fact, by doing that, the Tumengong is following the practice of the British in Singapore, which he named the Adat. But it's the Adat of the Europeans. So here I reproduce this letter if you want to have an idea about the phrasing. So this is a transliteration which may not be perfect, but I think it's understandable at that stage. So it's very good to be able to access those surat in the Jawi form, but these are not original. Most of them are copies that are kept in the record. It's very rare, but it exists that we have the original kept in the record, but most of them are our copies. So we know very few elements regarding the original form, but it's probable that the layout resembled to some extent more traditional Malay letters and had margins. We know that there was the presence of a seal chap, because it's indicated sometimes in the register, it's copied, or the surat are also mentioned as being surat chap. After this, we have another type of surat, the Surat Jual dan Beli. So as I explained, it's when the land is handed over to other party, sold to other party. It records later transactions when the right on the part of the river is transferred. And those transactions are recorded in a rather standardized way, which I will explain more later. But just to tell you a few elements, there is a heading announcing the nature of the document. After, there is an introductory formula, which is very standardized, and then, of course, the date. So it's both the signature of the different party and, interestingly, the witness, which is something rather new. And a constant feature is also that it records all the other transaction that has been made before. So sometimes we have like 2, 3, or 4 transactions with the clear reference to other surat where it's recorded. So we see that there was a will really to have something extremely clearly and recorded in detail. So here I give a transliteration of a long and a particular Surat Jual Beli, because there are 8 parties. And it's interesting because what this surat is recording is the transfer of rights on a river from 8 people to 2, following an initial grant to those 8 sellers by the Tumengong. So it's the second time that this land is, there's a transaction on this land. So beside the formula that I explained, what is interesting in this letter is that it shows that there have been just 3 weeks between the first, between basically the moment where the Tumenggung gave the right on this land to these 8 people, and the moment where they sold it, which seems a very, very short time. And I have no idea if that is an exception or that was common, but the other letters that I've seen, usually there was several years, a few years, 2, 3, 5 years, separating the transaction. Here is another type of surat. So sometimes the land were not sold, or the rights, on the land were not sold, but they were just given for a temporary period to another person. And here what we have is it's a partial transliteration, and the case was the Kangchu was not living all the time in Johor. If I remember well, he was also living in Riau, so he asked to pass these rights and duties to his son. But in the letter again, everything is extremely detailed for how long and what the son has to carry as tax, and what happened also if the Kangchu died. So what I would like now to show is in which way those letters are informative about the development or about a part of the Malay scriptural culture that is not so much researched, or at least shown until now. So when we compare those diplomatic letters, those surats with diplomatic letters, they are of course very different. We can't find any sign of the epistolography, the Malay epistolography, as it's known and has been studied before. But there are certain patterns, again, as I mentioned before, and I identified for the moment 5 information or elements that we can discuss. So the first is the title. At the exception of one Surat Keterangan, an early one, almost all the Surat Sungai that I've seen start with a single central line in the first quarter of the page, which state the name of the document with a formula which states with Bahawa ini surat. And this way to start a legal document echoes what is found at the same period in indentures that are used in Penang. And we know that those models circulating more largely in the Strait Settlement, at the regret of Maxwell, who complained, and I quote, as early as 1876, land was being transferred and mortgaged with all English legal technicalities by the aid of 2 or 3 ignorant scribes who brought printed forms from the nearest British settlements, Penang. So there is this fact that printed forms were circulating outside of the Strait Settlement and may have served as model. But as we will see, using a model does not mean copying directly. So the fact that the model circulated is attested. But if we look at the heading of the surat, it's also follow a pattern well known in Malay literature and letters. This Bahawa ini is used in literature, in sastra, for example, in the form Bahawa ini kisah cerita. So it's very, very common. And also in other agreements. And I give you 2 examples. Bahawa ini kontrak dari Gubermin Walanda sama Paduka Sri Sultan, or Bahawa ini surat bertambahan dan bergantian kontrak. So these declarative Bahawa do not seem to come at all from a British model. So it seems that what we have here is the case where a model from outside is adopted all the more easily because it resonates with existing patterns of Malay phrasing. We have also at the first sentence, ketahuilah oleh segala orang yang hadir dan lainnya, dan dengan kesukaan dan kerajaan dan akal yang sempurna. And these are systematically used in 3 types of document, the Surat Gadai, the Surat Wakil, and the Surat Jual Beli. For the first phrase, ketahuilah oleh segala orang yang ada hadir dan lainnya, there is little doubt that it's a translation from English, because it's almost a verbatim translation of what we have. Know all men by this present that. So that's the phrase that starts this indenture, those models that were used by the British in the Strait Settlement. The names, so here you can see an example in this document on the right top hand corner. So the name of the people mentioned as parties, the pihak, are repeated numerous times in the surat, and this again appeared to be something that we have in the British model. In the central part, there is this redundance, this repetition. It's a legal phrasing where the name of the parties are repeated again and again. Finally, the seal and the signature may have been influenced by those British model. We encounter in some of the Surat Sungai only both the signature and the seal together. And as we see, the British model are signed, sealed, and delivered in the presence of the witness. Again, the presence of the witness is something very common, especially for debt agreements and payments in the Malay world, but the signature of the witness seems to be something rather new. Another interesting element is the naming of God as the most trusted witness through the Arabic formula Walahu Khairul Shahidin, God is best witness, which is almost systematically mentioned at the end of the Surat Gadai Hutang, just before the signature of the different parties. And that's surprising because in the one that I've seen at least, none of the parties seem to have been Malay Muslims. But this sentence is repeated. The last element that is worth commenting is the date. There are different formats that are used. Some seems to be more Malay in the formulation, and some seems to be more influenced by the British administrative form. So in the Surat Sungai, the Surat Keterangan, and Surat Kongsi, the date is at the very beginning and given in great detail: year, date, month, day, hours. The Surat Wakil, Gadai, and Pajak have it in another order, in a way similar to the English indenture, with the date, the month, and the year. And the Surat Beli, Jual Beli have the same, but it's presented at the end before the signature. So what we can say, looking at those information, is that the European model had been used, but do not constitute a strict model that would have been followed. In fact, we have some terminology, phrasing that are translated into Malay, but they have been used to expand a practice that already existed in the Malay world. So those new terms and this new practice have been created to answer a rapid economic and social change. But if we look at the adat that existed for land tenure, it's not in contradiction. And in fact, the adat is very much the starting point. For example, if we take this fact that in the adat, there was no restriction about the selection and the appropriation of forest land, and that a proprietary right could be created by the clearing of the land and by a continuous use of it. This is very much in line with what is supported by the Surat Sungai. So now the question is, were the Surat Sungai an exception because, as I mentioned, there was other contract. We have other contract at the same period for land tenure, which are different. They are named the grants, the Gran, or sometimes they are Surat Perjanjian. They are issued by the same person, the Tumenggung, and but the difference is that the persons are different, but the use is sometimes quite similar. It's not gambia plantation or paper plantation, but it can be plantation. Sometimes it's concession and sometimes it's plantation. It seems very much that the Surat Sungai were an exception. It may be because it started in Riau, and it started at a period where the people walking the land were and commanding, or at least overviewing this work, were not Europeans. So that's where you have this recreation of a unit of what I call the small negri in the negri. Yeah, so that's one of, I would say, the point that I would like to make. It's really something particular. Now, if we look at the archival practice, that was very developed in Johor, but it seems that other sultanates also use that practice. So in Kedah, in the last quarter of the 19th century, there are copies of taxation records that are compiled together with royal letters. So we have the royal letters following the very traditional Malay way to write royal letters, but there are also these other types of documents that seems also to have been in great use. And why am I talking about this archival practice? Because registering and archiving papers is something that also brought additional notes on the copies. So we had the original, but the copies were also put together with additional marginal and superimposed notes on the records, which I haven't understood all of them yet. But what I feel is that they are very important to understand, to understand more about this practice of why suddenly there is an amount of data and of papers that is collected, and how it's collected is again inspired by the British model, but also having its own characteristics. So now, as a concluding remark, I would like to emphasize on the different points that I tried to make in this talk. My first aim was naturally to present an alternative narration of the territorial expansion of plantation in Johor and Singapore. So I hope to be able to do that for British Malaya in general, look at other cases. And to do that, I insisted on the process through which the expansion happened rather than on the results. And I propose to really look closely at Malay manuscript recording transition of land as a methodology. So what I'm trying to do that is to complete the, add to this economic history that we have on the country system by showing the cultural side of the country and the conqueror. The second thing that I wanted to show is that, in fact, Malay manuscript studies can renew certain approach, classical approach in Southeast Asian studies or Southeast Asian history, such as land administration, and that these should not be two separate fields, but come together when, of course, that makes sense. And I will finish on one thought that has been suggested by Annabelle Gallop, who is lead curator at the British Library and specialist of Malay manuscript. So she suggested that Vladimir Bradinsky proposed 3 domains that he norms fair of use for Malay letters. And she suggested that, in fact, there is a 4th one that is this, and what I presented is part of it, that is the use of Malay letters to record transaction and economic interest. And what I presented here is related to land, but there are many other documents in the records both kept in Malaysia and in Europe, that shows that Malay manuscript culture was very much also developed to record such events. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Elsa, for your talk today. What a very interesting topic, and I'm very, it is very interesting about this Surat Sungai. Also, is that mean you have seen this Surat Sungai, Dr. Elsa?
Yes,
Oh,
finally. Yeah,
yeah.
so I reproduce, I think, some of them on the slides.
Oh, that's from the Surat Sungai. Oh,
Yes.
that's very. May I know where do you get it from? Which archive?
No, they are in the Johor archive.
Oh,
They are
your
in the
archive.
Johor archive. They are
Okay.
easily accessible because Carl Troki, who access it, gave the records, in the source in a very easy way, and the staff in the archive and the archiving itself are very well ordered, so it's very
Oh.
easy to find it.
Okay, is that mean you can read this manuscript in Jawi, or you have any translator for you?
Yes, I can read, but I've
Oh,
been helped because it's a very difficult hand, and there are
yeah,
still parts that are very difficult.
that interesting because me myself I couldn't I couldn't read it because it's quite difficult to
Yes,
figure out what the writing is about. Okay, so that's very impressive of you. You are so influent in Malay. You can read in Jawi. So yes, this is a very good. As I said before, this is a very good and interesting topic because in these letters or Surat Sungai, it reflects the culture of Malay in Johor and Singapore. Also, it also show about the legal culture and rights on land in Johor. So they also can show the conception of space, territory, and sovereignty. So it's very good, it's very interesting. But yeah, maybe our scholar or our section members can do more research about this later. So it's very good. Okay, now thank you, Dr. Elsa. Now there is several questions that the people who watching this talk want to ask you. Here I will show you Dr. Azmi already put on the question there. Okay, from Cik Nas, is the Surat Sungai meant to be drafted to give the overseas Chinese residents permanently or temporarily? Meaning eventually the Malays expect all the overseas Chinese to return back to China.
oh, that's an interesting question. Um, I don't think that there was this idea of that was not a thing. I think at that time because there was plenty of land and
Yeah.
there was a need to develop a new economy with the plantation because the trade was so much disturbed, especially after the Dutch, destroyed Riau. It's really disturbed the whole region, the Riau Johor Sultanate for more than 10 years. So there was a need really to invite people that the Chinese come and to develop this plantation agriculture. But what is interesting is the Surataulia, where the original one that I have, you have a Chinese translation.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was clearly also, it was given. So we have the one in the record, but I assume that the Kangchu had also one. And we have the Malay and we have the Chinese. I haven't translated, I need someone to help me for the Chinese. So I don't know if it's an exact translation, but it seems that from the length is at least a translation, I think.
Oh, that's very good. That's very interesting. Yeah, there also translation in Chinese.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay, just may I know Surat Sungai is the same with Surat Tauliah?
So Surat Sunai is, I don't know who used it first.
Okay.
Surat Taoya is one type of Surat Sungai. So what
Oh,
we
one
found is
time.
in secondary literature is Surat Sungai, and I always believed that it was just one type of Surat named
Okay.
Surat Sungai, but in
Uh,
fact, all the other Surat, they are named Surat Taulia or Surat Jual Beli or Surat Pajak, and all those are collectively also named Surat Sungai, but the Surat Sungai denomination appears very little. I think I found it just one time in the Surat, in the middle of a Surat that the Surat Sungai was mentioned. So I don't know if it was used at that time or if it's researcher after to pick up this name to talk about it more easily.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Elsa. And we go to the next question. Okay, from Muhammad Khairi. Di Riau, semasa di bawah penguasa yang di-Pertuan Muda, sistem surat sungai dan kancu ada diamalkan dalam penerokaan permukaan tanah kah?
Yes, it seems, but I don't know if it was named Surat Sungai. But we don't know because we don't have documents for that period.
Oh.
So we know that in Riau the system existed because it's recorded in Dutch sources. So we know the system existed. That was the same system, and the same people moved after to Singapore and Johor. So we may assume that there was a kind of surat. But was it called Surat Sungai? Was it the same Surat Taulia? We don't know because the ruler was, I don't know if it was the same tradition of editing Surat Taulia in Riau and in Johor. It could be, but it could also be different.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the answer. And now can we move to the third question? Okay, from our section members, Dr. Tanji Singh. He said, good afternoon, Dr. Elsa. Just wondering what the role played by the prominent Chinese entrepreneur at the time, Wong Ah-Fu, in the country system in Johor. Thanks.
I won't be able, I'm sorry, to answer that question because I have to say that I completely leave the economic side out of my study because it has already been done. And there is also, while I was doing the research, I could not access, so I could not come to Malaysia first because of the COVID. And Carl Troki very kindly sent me his archive, but he sent it also to another student. So I know that there's another Malaysian student who is now an assistant professor, in fact, somewhere in Malaysia, who did her PhD. And she was focusing on that question. So that's
okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you for your answer. Yes. Okay, we move to another question from Zainal Abidin Sharif. The first one is, terma yang diguna pakai bagi surat tersebut surat keterangan atau surat sungai. Okay, sebab kata nama surat-surat kan. And then the second is, mengapa dipanggil surat sungai? Ada sejarah kenapa dipanggil surat sungai? Adakah surat keterangan yang diamalkan di Johor mengguna pakai model Belanda sehingga hari ini perkataan surat keterangan masih diguna pakai di Indonesia?
Yeah, very interesting. Most probably for the third question. One thing that I still need to do is compare Dutch models and also look at what was the use by the Chinese in Java, for example. So yes, there is an influence of the Dutch, but I don't know in which measure. But for the Surat Keterangan, yes. For why Surat Sungai, it's because the settlement was near a river, for the irrigation. But I don't know why. I mean, that's an hypothesis, but why Surat Sungai and why not Surat Kwangchu or Surat Kangkar?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's very good. Yeah, very interesting to be explored later. Maybe we can how the terminology to this Surat Sungai just appeared or just be used by these people in Johor and also Singapore. Okay, thank you, Dr. Elsa. And then another one, Syed Ahmad Fatih. Where are these original Surat Sungai were preserved?
So a few original are preserved in the archive in Johor. So they are not in Kuala Lumpur, they are in Johor. I am wondering if some originals are not kept by families in Johor or in Singapore. And that would be interesting to look at private collection. And I don't know, maybe that's our thinking. Maybe they are, because they are not in Singapore in the archives, there are no Surat Sungai, which is strange. But from afar, when I tried to look, I didn't find anything in Singapore. They may be in private collection and maybe in lawyer archive, because this
Royal
is land
Archive.
registration. This is land registration, and these are like really big assets if you think about
Yes.
Singapore.
Yes.
So that would be interesting to look for Singapore, in fact, because
Is
there
there
are
any
earlier.
restriction to access that Royal Archive?
Sorry.
Is there any restriction? You said maybe
No,
is
normal. I mean, for the Johor archive, it's the normal registration
okay.
as a
Okay.
researcher, and those archives, maybe because they have those records, are very well ordered, and
Okay.
they kept the manual catalog,
Oh,
which I
many
think is
categories.
better. So they have both the digital and it's really convenient to do research here. So I really encourage everybody who wants to go, because there are hundreds and hundreds of letters. And
Wow.
you can't copy, you have to go there and to read it, and it's very long to read it,
Yeah.
because you need to get used to that, what is written, and then after so it takes days or weeks first. So I think people who are in Malaysia would, that's a great research to do, to visit
Yeah,
those
that's very
archives.
interesting. When you say you very encourage us to go there and go see by ourselves, that I'm also attracted to go there. Okay, thank you. And can we move to another question? Yes, this is from our beloved professor from Hani Musa. Okay, good afternoon, Dr. Clave. Thank you for a very interesting presentation on Surat Sungai. Andaya assert that the Surat Sungai, which is the refined country system under the initiative of Ibrahim's sons, Abu Bakr, okay, or was closely modeled on a European style contract. Can you elaborate?
Yes, I think I can disagree slightly with that, because I won't say it's closely modeled. As I try to show it, we find indication that it's modeled, and we know that Abu Bakr was really following European models. That was a strategy to do that, to modernize the country, the Sultanate. But from what I see, there are a lot of Malay elements, and I'm trying to dig that out. So there is definitely an influence, but I won't say that it's modeled closely. And I'm trying also to look, for example, the Suratula, 100% Malay, and this is the first Surat Sungai. Without the Suratula, there is no country, and without country, you can't have the plantation. So the Surat Taulia, again, when we talk about the Surat Sungai in general, very often it's the second or the later cell of that we have, the Surat Jual Beli, and these do not include the Surat Taulia. But I would, that's what I'm trying to do, in fact, to refine a little bit this statement, to see in which way it's modeled according to the European style. So the signature, definitely with the chap, the signature is a European addition. The fact that the witness sign, the fact that there is this in front of everybody, the opening. But after, that may also follow. There's very, very complicated phrasing for the Surat Jual Beli and for the Surat Gadai, where they explain the share on, maybe I can read it, the share on the right, so bahagian hak, and I don't understand exactly. So the person is pounding its land, he say, I have 9 share of right on this land, and I don't understand what is this 9 share, if it's the land which is dividing into 9, and then of course, as the land is not owned, he has 9 physical share, and these are the benefit of this land, or if it's the total price of the land, which is divided into 9, and the person own that share, but in terms of money, and that's the money which is so, and this does not seem to be European. I don't know, at least not the British, and that may come from a Chinese system. So more to research.
Oh, okay. It's very quite a big, nice different part in that letters. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And we move to another question. Okay, from Fahmi Baharudin, sejauh mana kedudukan Surat Sungai ini dalam keabsahan undang-undang. Yes, because kata tadi ada legal aspect kan. And terutamanya apabila semasa kedatangan British di Johor dan sehingga kemerdekaan Johor.
So the system has been abolished.
Has been abolished. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Probably because of this unclarity, the fact that there was no border, and what we have after is more model. So in the undang-undang for Johor, we have like models for the grants, and after it seems to follow more what we have at an earlier period, again at the same time as the Surat Sungai, the grant or the Surat Perjanjian that were issued for example, the Elsa family in Singapore or in Johor were not Surat Sungai, but they were issued at the same time, and they show a very different type of contract. So that's that was what was followed, and that was closer to the British model.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I think this is the last one from Ilham Cleverly. Okay, and salam hormat Dr. Elsa. Terima kasih atas perkongsian. Saya ada 2 soalan. Melalui surat-surat yang digunakan, golongan saudagar Cina yang manakah banyak memperoleh manfaat untuk kegiatan ekonomi, Jihin atau Haisan?
That's a good question. That's a very too detailed question. I would say that I saw the first name more. The first is more familiar to me, so it means that I see it more in the Surat. But it's also one of the most difficult things to transliterate. Is the Chinese name. In Malay, they are very difficult. So I have other transliteration, and I use also books published where I have the names of Chinese to try to match, because sometimes I have a lot of blank in my translation. It's quite difficult sometimes. Yeah.
So you just couldn't figure out which party just monopoly in this surat,
just
right?
Yeah, sometimes
it's just a name.
The name is a bit difficult, but it's not relevant, because what I see is just a portion of the archive.
Just a portion of that. Okay, thank you. But maybe the second question, where is it? Maybe okay. Saya rasa the second question not coming yet. Tapi itulah kira settle lah, Tazmi. Okay, I think we are almost to 5 PM. So terima kasih banyak yang bertanyakan soalan, dan terima kasih banyaklah dan tahniah kepada Dr. Elsa. Saya kata tadi memang satu presentation yang sangat menarik tentang surat-surat sungai, dan moga boleh memberi wacana lagi lah kepada bahagian sejarah kepada masa datang, dan juga boleh bermanfaat kepada semua peminat sejarah di Malaysia. I don't know how to pronounce it. Merci beaucoup, Dr. Azmi.
Merci beaucoup. Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, very good.
Merci
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much to you, and again to the section of history of USM for the invitation, and I will be very happy and hope to come back to Penang very soon.
Yeah, we are welcoming you, Dr. Elsa.
Thank you.
Okay. Terima kasih, and thank you again, Miss Dr. Elsa, and thank you all again for all that attending this talk. You are very superb, very supportive, and thank you for all your questions to Dr. Elsa. So I hope we gain a new knowledge from this talk, and look forward to the new talk from Dr. Elsa in the near future. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.